Good morning. We are living during extremely difficult times, when the picture of the world is changing quickly. And, most importantly, it is extremely hard to assess the actions of the main political players. To illustrate this point, I can mention that even such a renowned expert as Andrei Devyatov recently gave quite a pessimistic speech, stating that Russia has lost everything. I need to point out that even if Russia lost or failed, it did so in the framework of the model that Andrei Devyatov sticks to. Perhaps this is an interesting and well thought of model, but the model itself did not turn out well. I have a different view and would like to analyze this based on the Chinese philosophical concept, according to which, in any changing situation, there are always three competing forces. If two are active and fighting each other, the third, passive force, will ultimately win. So, when trying to dissect any political configuration, our goal should be to identify the three players. If we look at the six global projects that have been actively played for many years, just like in a card game, then we will notice that over the last 20 years, some of them have dropped out. First, the Islamic project has absolutely fallen apart. And also, Europe is broken. This does not mean Europe cannot get back together. It possibly can, but as of today, Europe has no agency, meaning no independent political capacity. At present, there are three main political actors. The first is the United States, with remnants of Islam and remnants of Europe. The second is Great Britain, with China, that act together and control most of Europe via the European Union. And finally, the third force is Russia, which also has its piece of Islam and some other things. If we look at these three forces to determine which ones are active and which ones are passive, we will see that Russia, without a doubt, is a passive one. For us, the war in Ukraine is a defensive operation. We were forced to fight it. There is no way to consider Russia being active. Quite the contrary. Russia is passive. If Russia had been active, it would have started all of this much earlier. Great Britain, with its allies, is obviously active, because long time ago they started this NATO expansion eastward, and they are the ones provoking Ukraine to fight Russia. Finally, the United States is also active, simply because it is the largest country that controls the dollar, the global currency. So we are passive. That is why, in theory, based on the Chinese concept of three forces, we should ultimately win. Whether or not we would win in practice is a separate question. So, if we look at what the participants have been doing, including the politicians like various Merz, macarons, with their wives and the rest, we will see a remarkable picture. They're all scared. Just like in our saying, a scared crow is afraid of a bush. So, what are they afraid of? I can tell you what. None of them has any strategic plan. None of them can even imagine what model of the world we will have in the future. I'm not even talking about 5 years from now. They have no idea what will happen in 2 years. And, most importantly, they have no clue what their place in this world is going to be. With Trump, it is more or less clear. He is less focused on the future. His job is to optimally enter the upcoming crisis, and while doing so, seize control over the government, primarily over the main instrument, which is the Federal Reserve. This is the task Trump took upon himself. This task is tactical and has little to nothing to do with Russia. His secondary objective is to drop the external commitments, and he's been working on it. Trump is wrapping up various global projects for a simple reason. They took bites of the pieces that they not only cannot swallow, they cannot even properly chew on. Look, for instance, at the story with Merz. First, he authorized the use of the long-range missiles against Russia, and then he backed off. No, we did not mean that. That was a mistake. Next, there was an agreement to catch the ships of the so-called Shadow Fleet of Russia. And then, oh no, there is no such an agreement anymore. There are a number of similar occurrences to illustrate the same point. All of this is what Andrei Devyatov calls the signs found on reconnaissance. The symptoms that the Western leaders are not quite ready to admit the need to retreat, but already understand they can no longer push their operation forward at the same rate as they did before. They have no resources for that at all. None left. Obviously, the main idea was to force us to surrender, but the last events in Istanbul demonstrated that we, Russia, are not going to surrender. Moreover, attempts to attack us with the waves of drones elicited quite a strong response from our side. Along came the understanding that our next response would be even tougher. All of this generated serious psychological tension in the West. Additionally, the recent events in Romania and what has been happening with the Alternative for Germany party tell us that the ability of Western European elites to control the situation is going away, and we understand why. They no longer have the money, which reminds me of the famous catchphrase, there is no money but hang in there. For this reason, a very interesting article popped up explaining that it is time to go back to using soft power against Russia. This article was published in Messenger, the Telegram channel. That is where I saw it. I posted my review of this article, and it is available for subscribers of my channel, because there are many things that are not politically correct that came to light. But the interesting part is something else. Specifically, the very fact that the West is preparing the grounds for some sort of peace settlement, at least for now, after which, for the years to follow, they will try to use diplomatic games to win back what they lost on the battlefield. The problem, however, is that if we refuse to budge, refuse to agree what is obviously unfavorable to us, it is not clear what their backup plan is. During my childhood years, when I attended a chess club, I learned one thing, which is also mentioned in all chess textbooks. In a chess game, having even the poorest plan is better than having no plan. Well, there is another situation which is even worse than having no plan. It is having two plans at the same time. But no worries, this is not about today's West. They do not have multiple plans. They have none. This is a very difficult situation, and they have to do something about it. The United States had a plan, a practical economic plan I described in the fall of 2022, gaining control over the markets of Southeast Asia, conquering them from China. However, as of today, it is more or less clear that they have put so many spokes into each other's wheels. By they, I mean the UK and the US, London and Washington, that this plan is no longer accomplishable, at least not in its original version. It is possible to modify this plan, adapt it to the new situation, but someone needs to do that and devote time to it. But today, everyone is preparing for the upcoming crisis instead. At the same time, as a result of this crisis, the US and China will both suffer the most. But I cannot rule out a possibility that the United States, due to its stronger military resource, would keep up a relative advantage by the end of the crisis. Whether they will be able to use this advantage and accomplish the plan versus not, it is very difficult to say at this point. We simply do not know, and it is impossible to predict, because in all its history, the United States has never gone through a crisis of this scale, even in the early 1930s, because back then there was no threat to the territorial integrity of the United States. As we see, the struggle for power inside the Western camp has intensified. This could be seen, for example, by the recent visit of the King, Charles III, to Canada, where he delivered the speech opening the 45th Canadian Parliament. What does it mean? This is our territory, not yours. Anyway, in conclusion, I'd like to say that the situation is very slowly changing in Russia's favor. For that very reason, I believe it is too early for us to enter the active phase. However, I believe it is time to start discussing our vision of the future, where we see our country and its place in the world. It is already clear that our vision is the one of an empire. We will offer many countries to join us in the framework of this imperial concept, meaning there will be the metropole and the joint allies, some of which, many years later, might become part of the metropole. For instance, back in the 1980s, many of us had an illusion that Kazakhstan was part of the metropole, and so was Ukraine. But the subsequent years proved that neither was the case. We learned that these are much more complex and nuanced issues. But regarding our empire, what kind of economy would it have? How would it position itself internationally? Whether it would become a conservative power or a left-leaning power, because China gave up the latter role. The matter of fact, the former USSR was a left conservative power, yet failed to fulfill that role for a number of reasons. These are the questions to start thinking of. The first step is to add these topics to our public discourse. Unfortunately, all our media remain under liberal control, and as a result are absolutely incompatible with this. This is what we need to work on. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.